Hello, everyone. Here we are with Tammy Silvers, one of our amazing teachers. Tammy, introduce yourself.
I am so glad to be meeting all of your terrific quilters and so excited to be joining you for Quilt 2024. My name is Tammy Silvers and I design under the label of Tamarini's. Hopefully you've heard of me, but if not, I have a very eclectic style, meaning that I run the gamut, everything from nod to traditional to pretty contemporary. Some might say modern. I do everything from little quilts to big quilts, everything in between. Pre-cut friendly, fused applique, like I said, eclectic, a little bit of everything for everybody. And I am super excited to talk to y'all about the class that we're going to be doing this year.
Yes, I definitely want to get into that. First of all, tell us about your background. Is this one of your quilts or are these your designs?
So, yes, the quilt that's hanging behind me, I chose this specifically because we're going to talk about it in a little bit with the class. And yes, it is one of my designs. Now, one of the things that surprises some people about me is that I was an English teacher, not art. I've always had an interest in art, but I don't have a degree in art. I don't have a degree in design. I was a high school English teacher, and then I worked for the Department of Education. So nothing to do with quilting, but this has been my passion. I was going to say my side hustle, but honestly, it has been my passion. And my husband would say my obsession for the last 32 years. And I know that because I started quilting the year my daughter was born. So now she's mortified. Everybody knows how old she is, but now I know how long I've been quilting.
Okay, yeah. And was that like a desire to make a quilt for her? Is that what first got you into quilting?
Oh, that would be a sweet story if that were the case, but that's not the case. My sister-in-law invited me to come take a quilt class with her. And Lori, if you're watching this, let's just be real. I was not your favorite person 32 years ago, but I wanted to be. So I agreed to take the quilt class, which led to me making my first quilt top, which is still
Hmm.
a quilt top because I'm just going to be honest with you and pardon my French, but it was butt ugly. There was nothing redeeming about it other than it was a quilt top and it was done. I did not have a sense of color and value placement, and yeah. But everybody has to start somewhere, right? We
Hmm.
all have to start somewhere. And I started with that very, very sad quilt top. And then I got seriously bitten by the bug and started taking every class I could get my hands on to find out what really appealed to me. So that's how I got started.
Amazing. And it sounds like, do you have still have this quilt top?
I do. I keep
Yeah.
it. I keep it. And sometimes in my lectures, I will bring it and show it because I think it makes us all feel better. I don't know about y'all, but I see amazing work out there and I feel intimidated. I feel, oh, I'm just not worthy to be cutting fabric and sewing
Mhm.
because look at this amazing thing that they did that I can't possibly do. But the secret sauce is they didn't out of the gate make that. They started somewhere. So I do like to show that sad quilt top to say this is where it started, and here's where I am now. And, so it was a journey. So yes, I do keep it to remind myself of my roots.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, I think that's a lovely story, even if it wasn't making a quilt for your daughter. And the batiks in the background. Well, should we talk about your workshop first, or would that
Yeah.
be a good
Yeah.
segue? Or yes, okay, let's talk about your workshop. So tell us about that.
Okay, so my workshop, crazy excited about this because this is one of my favorite approaches when I look at constructing a quilt. And so I say constructing, but that's not really the right choice of words. The right choice of words is when I look at choosing fabrics for my quilt top. So I chose to hang the quilt sound waves. That's the quilt that's hanging behind me. I chose to hang it because it's a great representation of the technique that we're going to do a deep dive into. And that technique is creating a gradation from your fabric stash. So you may or may not be familiar with ombre or gradation fabrics, and those are so fun to work with. They typically either go light at one selvage to dark at the other selvage, or some companies go dark on the selvages, light in the center. And those create a lot of movement in your quilts. They create a lot of depth. If you're doing smaller pieces, you can get a huge value change by cutting across the width of the fabric. So they're wonderful to work with. But let's be honest, you probably have some scraps. You probably have a stash. And sometimes we want to shop our stash when we're working with a new project. So creating a gradation from your fabric stash is mimicking that movement, that shift from light to dark. It could be moving from large scale to small scale. But the whole concept behind that is it's a movement. It's creating a path for the eye to follow. So it does just that. It creates movement in your quilt. And I always say this in my lectures, you're powerful because you control what people see and how they see it just by your choices. So in creating a gradation from your fabric stash, we're going to do a deep dive into that. We're going to look at different applications. This is one. It's not the only way to apply this technique. We're going to look at different applications of what creating a gradation using fabric is going to look like, how it's going to affect how you view the quilt. And then we're going to do a fun little, well, it's fun for me. You get to watch. I'm going to pull out my actual scrap basket. And I'm going to start looking at fabrics and creating a gradation. And there's no wrong or right here. And that's the fun thing to realize. So I'm really happy that y'all get to dive into that with me and maybe apply that, because you can apply it to almost any quilt, a traditional quilt, a modern quilt, a fused applique quilt. It's just such a versatile technique, but it's a way to personalize it, make it yours, and like I said, create that path for the eye to follow. So much fun. And
That
you get to use up your stash.
Absolutely. And I was already looking forward to the workshop, but now I'm looking forward to it even more. And how fascinating, because when you were talking about gradations, I was thinking in terms of ombres. And so if someone had said to me, how do you get from gray to orange? I would not be thinking pink and green. So, this is extraordinary. How well, I suppose we'll find out in the workshop how all this works, but it's certainly extremely effective in the quilt behind you.
Thank
And
you.
you've used batiks for this one, which I know are a fabric you particularly love, and you design them
I
yourself.
do. In fact, this was my third fabric line, and it was called Elements. And I really enjoy designing batiks. They are a lot of fun. It's a little different from designing print fabrics because the focus starts in a different area with batiks. But I have been passionate about batiks even before I started designing with them. They're extremely versatile. And we've moved beyond what people think of as a traditional batik. You can find batiks that run the spectrum, that feel very traditional, that feel very contemporary. There are whimsical, novelty style batiks. There are serious, if fabric can be serious, there are serious batiks.
Mhm.
And then there are texture batiks, and they're just so amazing to work with because I love that high thread count. Batiks aren't going to ravel on you. They're not going to fray on you like a traditional woven is. And no disrespect to the woven fabrics. I sew with those too. And yes, I dearly love them. But let's be real, sometimes it's frustrating, all of
Mm.
those stray threads. And because of that high thread count, with batiks, you really can easily get precision piecing, and they press beautifully. I mean, there's just so many things to love about batiks.
Absolutely. I mean, and they are, as you say, so versatile. Um, is it possible to talk to us about the process of designing batiks? Because
Yeah,
I'm sure people are
I
probably
can give
familiar
you
with that.
my process. Other
Yeah.
people may work differently.
Yeah.
And it's going to be very broad spectrum, but I start with the motif, which is actually called the chop, and it's not spelled CHOP. You would think, right? That's what it sounds
Mm-hmm.
like. TJAP. Understand that batiks,
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, are made in Indonesia. So
Right.
Balinese, and I don't know Balinese, so please don't like, Tammy,
No,
that's
no.
not right. I could be wrong, but chop. So the chop is the motif. It's what we think of, that we sometimes see in the fabric. So in the one behind me, I've got some high contrast. So you can see these little triangles. This was
Mm-hmm.
elements, triangles. So we're talking mountains, because this was a graphic interpretation of the elements and of the earth. So you can see those triangles, and they're different sizes, but those triangles are actually the motif. So I would have started with that as a concept. This little basket weave, I would have started with that as a concept. And then you expand on that. Okay, so just like any fabric line, you want some type of cohesiveness. So is it going to be a certain style? We've seen dots. People have come out with a whole line and it's just dots, small dots, medium dots, big dots, blah, blah, blah. So that's a theme. They did dots. For me, I was thinking about, like I said, portraying the elements of the earth and the earth itself graphically and very geometrically and very simple designs. So I had my little mountains, I had my basket weave, which was my strata. Think of the layers of the earth, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
different widths and thicknesses and everything. So I had that concept. So, okay, what different shapes can I do? All right, that's great. That's great. I've got enough. You need 5, 6 to make a collection. Now you have to, for an effective collection, vary the size and scale of those chops. You can't have everything big or everything tiny, then the collection's not as interesting. Okay, so you've got varying scales. What's the orientation of them? Is everything going to be directional? How many people like working solely with directional fabric? Yeah,
Mm.
nobody raises their hand.
Yeah.
So we've got to have some scatter prints, which scatter prints are those that are non-directional. Doesn't matter which way you turn the fabric, the print's going to work. You do want some directional because they're so interesting. When you have a directional print, it can create, again, I'm all about movement.
Mm-hmm.
It can create some movement. You need some organic shapes. If everything is very angular, sometimes the line feels very harsh. All right, so you've got your chops, you've got your variety of scale, your variety of orientation. Now you have to create a repeat. Batiks, whether you may or may not know this, batiks are made by hand, which is why we pay a
Mm.
little bit more for them. So these batik makers in Bali are artists, and I've watched video. I've not had the pleasure of going to Bali, unfortunately, but I've watched video of them making them. So what happens is when I create my chop, and then I do the variety of scale and I create my repeat. That repeat is kind of like, oh, I was going to say, I thought I had it here, but I don't. It's like a giant stamp, but it's made out of coiled, very thin copper wire. So they're going
Right.
to coil the shapes to create, for example, the triangle or my stripes. And then they're going to take that giant stamp and they're going to dip it in liquid wax. And then they're going to take that stamp and they're going to stamp the fabric. That sounds very simple, but then you try it just for giggles and grins. Get a potato and carve a shape and dip it in liquid wax and then go, oh, what a hot mess I have. Because you
Yeah.
have to have just enough wax to penetrate the fabric, but not too much wax that it spreads and you lose your shape. And then when you watch them do this, they're dipping, stamp, dip, stamp, dip, stamp, and it's just so quick. They know what they're doing. But that's
Absolutely.
the power of the repeat, because this stamp needs to mesh with this stamp so that
Mm-hmm.
the design flows. Yes. So, so I have to create the repeat. Then I have to do the colorations. And it's, again, it depends on, company to company. But for me, it's little pieces of paper. This is the chop number. And then I want, for example, when I did this, I want this sky blue to be my background, and I want my chop to be the lime.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm imagining all of these different color combinations, and I'm telling them what's going to be the chop, what's going to be the background. And I say background, but most of the time, the background is the last thing that gets the dye,
Right.
because batiks are a wax resist process.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. So when I talked about stamping the fabric, if you had white base goods and you stamped it, then wherever the wax is going to stay white, and whatever they dip it in next is going to be that color. So it is a process that's going to build. And most of the time, it's easiest to go from light to dark. So wherever your lightest area is what's going to be first.
Mm.
So
Wow. Okay. That's a lot. How did you get into this?
I was asked,
Yeah.
Tammy, would you like to design fabric for us? And I was like, me? Okay, I'll figure this out. And it's been a lot of fun. I have really, really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. And of course, you also been featured in a lot of magazines.
Mhm.
Was that a similar process? Have they approached you, or you approach them? Like, how does that kind of thing work?
So I did mention I've been doing this for a hot minute, and
Mm,
I've been on my own designing under the label Tamarini's since 2013. For about 5 years prior to that, I had a design partner under another label. So let's go back previous to 2013.
mm,
Back in the day, I was teaching quilting at a local big box store, and one of my students happened to work in the same office complex as Jean Wright. And Jean Ann Wright was the editor of Quilt magazine. And they would see each other in the parking lot, how you greet people and you see them. And she said, my friend designs quilts, because I had started designing projects because my students would say, I want to learn this. And I was like, oh,
mm,
okay. And I would make something up. And she said, send her to see me. So I did. And I started designing projects for Jean Ann for the magazine, my design partner and I. And back in the day, Jean Ann might email me. She was local, um, convenient, very convenient. So
mhm,
she might email me, she might call me and say, hey, can you do a baby quilt? Can you do this? Or I have this line of fabric, design something. That's how it started.
mm,
Now, as we all know, our market has shrunk. We have fewer quilt magazines. We have fewer magazines in general. I
mm.
feel for print publication. It's a much tighter market. So now, because of that tighter market, the way the process works now, for most, there may be some variations here. You're going to propose a project to the magazine, and they're going to look at that, and they're going to look at it from their editorial needs. And some of the magazines, when they put out their design calls, are letting the designers know. It really helps. We're focusing on summer projects, or we're focusing on this color palette because when the issue comes out, this is going to be the story. And then they're looking for projects that meet specific needs, because within the publication, they may want a baby project and a pre-cut project and a bed quilt, etc. So it does vary slightly from publication to publication. What's so interesting is this is so far in advance. It's
Mhm.
because if you think about it, you've got to have time. It's a quick turnaround, but you've got to have time to make the quilt, send it to them. They have to photograph it. You have to write the instructions, send it to them. Oftentimes it has to be within their template or their format. And then all of that has to be editorialized to fit into the publication. And then it goes to print.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So yes, and the timescale is a good point. And in fact, because we're recording this in November, but it'll be going live in January. Are there things that you've noticed that are going to be big in 2024, or that are going away in 2024? Um,
Oh,
and
I I'll
trends
be
and so on.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I have not, but here's why. I am almost like tunnel vision. I'm focused on my avenues of exploration for
Mm.
2024. And so if it's something that's not in my scope, I'm not even looking at it. Does that make sense? For
Yeah,
example,
absolutely.
I don't do needle turn. I tend to do brights. I tend to do fairly contemporary. I don't do a lot of traditional. Um, so if it were a primitive, for example, primitive is still out there. I don't think it's as big a section of the market as it was at one time, but we know the pendulum's going to swing, folks, so
Hmm.
don't stress. But I don't do that. So I don't really pay attention to that side of things.
No, that makes sense. So can I be cheeky and ask what you've got in mind for 2024 for your own business?
I have several things I'm very excited about. I am working on some recorded classes, so on demand classes. So super excited that, Quilt 2024 is going to be a great taste of that. So I'm working on some of those. This quilt behind me is made using my guided improv technique, which is super fun. I'm very passionate about it, and it's a mashup or a happy marriage, if you will, between traditional piecing and true improv. It embraces the imperfection of improv piecing, but gives you some structure so you can reproduce the shapes. So the classes have been very popular with guilds,
Mm.
and so I am working on a 12-month small project. So think seasonal projects, but
Oh.
each month has a small little guided improv project that you could, easily display or create into a sampler quilt. So I'm hoping to be able to launch that in mid-year next year, in addition to the recorded classes. So those are my two big, big things that I am very excited about.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, well, I'm looking forward to seeing all of these things come to light. Uh, who is it, or what is it that inspires you when you're designing or when you're creating a new fabric line?
So there's not one thing, and that's
Mm.
I mean, are there people that influence me? Yes. I am I am fangirl, totally over the moon over Lisa, and I'm gonna butcher her last name. So, Lisa, if you happen to see this recording, my apologies. But she's a graphic artist, Lisa Congdon. She has a style that is it is unique. I feel like it's more modern folk art kind of style. She has a little bit of often a political message incorporated into her art, and she's I just I really admire her as a person that stands up for her particular beliefs and no apologies. This is who I am and this is what I do. But I also really, really love her work because when you see it, it makes you feel good. So I would say she is an influence of mine, but inspiration comes from everywhere. I get ideas, driving down the road. I was listening to a um, historical fiction on an Audible book,
Mm.
and they were talking about the development of playing cards, and playing cards started out as tarot cards, and they were talking about the meaning within some of the cards. And I didn't I came up with a quilt that I call the Wheel of Fortune, and it was inspired as I was listening to that particular book. So inspiration can come from anywhere, latching on to a particular idea, and it's like, oh, that's a lot of fun. How can I put my vision to that particular concept or that particular phrase or that particular idea? So I don't know
Oh,
if that helps or not, but
fascinating. Yeah. Do you think that's because of your background as an English teacher that get
Most
these
definitely.
information?
One of
Mm.
my quilts that is one of my oldest ones, but it's still a steady seller. It came about. I used to teach AP Lit, which are these are the kids that are getting college credit for their high school classes. And we did what was called a close reading. So, a close reading in literature, you take a single paragraph, or it could be a single sentence, it could be a single word. But when you do a close reading, you are doing a deep, deep, deep dive into that particular word, sentence, and all of the associations that go with that. And we were reading Frankenstein, and we at the very beginning of the story, there's just a brief mention, because Frankenstein, in case y'all don't know, this is your little lit lesson for the day. Frankenstein was not the monster, he was the doctor. And Frankenstein is pursuing his monster across the frozen tundra, and they're talking about the Tartarians. And I'm going to be doing a blog post in the next month. So if you want to know what the close reading was and how that inspired my Tartary quilt, come back and read my blog. But yes, I do think that a lot of it does come from that type of approach to literature, that deep dive into a particular concept and how it can mean, how it has a depth. It has multiple layers of meanings, like an onion. So, yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, and I will be putting links to the people you've mentioned and also to the blog post in the interview notes as well, so that people can find them easily. This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I know all your social links and your website links are on your teacher page, so I encourage people to go and look at those. Yeah, just want to thank you for your time today. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. I am so appreciative of you bringing Quilt 2024 together. I think it's a fun concept, and I think folks are going to get a ton of value from it. So I'm excited for everyone that's participating.
Thanks, Tammy.